in the name of Jesus. Break every chain, break every chain, break every chain. There is power in the name of Jesus. There is power in the name of Jesus. There is power in the name of Jesus. Break every chain.
to say first that is, one, I really felt like the Lord was saying to some of us tonight, by way of reminder, the safest place for us is under the shadow of the wings of the Almighty. That is the safest place for you. And so I heard him say, please stop resisting, because you're not very good at covering yourself. You were designed to do that, to be your own cover. God says, I want to cover you myself. And so he's inviting you tonight, he's inviting all of us tonight under his wings. Because it is the safest place to be.
Yes.
As Reese said, as we are now in month 2 of 3, where we are going to focus on being reconciled to ourselves. This journey has been, for many of us, as Reese said, challenging, to say the least, exciting, filled with anxiety for some of us. Some of us being reconciled to ourselves, God has renewed some dreams that we had left many years ago. And I also heard the Lord say that for many of us, well, let me say it this way, that if we would truly allow Him, by His Spirit, to really bring us into relationship with the one you that He created you to be. If we'd allow Him to do that in us, that all of the stuff in your life that feels like it is flesh being grinded on the edge of a cheese grater, that just you've learned to live with, but it pains you that it's there. Pains you that's part of your life. God says, I will actually heal that. I will transform that. I will change that. I will remove that from your life. You have to be willing to come under my cover and no longer act as though you are covering yourself. God says, I want to be your cover. And though there are things you've learned to live with, He says, I still want in this season, these next 2 months, to bring wholeness to your life, if you would allow me. On-Ramps is a church where our mission is to be a healing community that's healing our community. We're very focused on that. We're very clear about that. And so for us then to be in this journey where God's reconciling us to ourselves, that's part of our mission. The healing community, that God would heal us by being part of this faith community, and that we in turn, because we are healthier. Someone said, look, one of the ways to ensure that a church is healthy, or to ensure an organization is healthy, or ensure a family is healthy, or ensure that you are, or ensure that anything is healthy, is to make sure that you're healthy, because you're leading that. And so, for us, right, in order for this community to gain a new level of health and to walk into a new place in the Lord, right, we have to walk in that place. We need to experience a new level, a new degree of health, a new degree of wholeness. And one of the ways that we're doing that, I just want to say, as you're wearing, you see I'm wearing this beautiful purple shirt. This is our Say Hello shirt. This shirt, it's not a corny, thing. This is, I'm not saying, not go over and say hello, everybody. That's not the thing. No, that's not it. This is, as many things are in this world that are genius, it is the brainchild of Janelle Evans. Okay, all right. And basically what happened is that we're trying to live out our mission. And so a number of months ago, about 6 months ago, we started a business. Yes, On Ramps Covenant Church started a business. Yeah. We did it because there's so many people in our community, first in our church and beyond, that are having a hard time finding employment. Maybe you have a felony in your record. Maybe you've been incarcerated. Maybe you just have a bad employment history. Whatever it is, it's been very difficult to find a job. So we said, hey, well, we can keep trying to help you find jobs, but maybe we'll just create some too. Okay? And so we started this business, and in simple terms, we basically we design and print any form of print advertising, and then most importantly, we deliver it anywhere, any way you want to any place, anytime. And so for our thing is this, for you all, as part of the church, if you know anybody, if your employer, if your family business, if you know somebody who owns a business, who does any form of advertising, where they're mailing stuff out through the post office, or they are trying to connect with certain, neighbors or residents or apartments or whatever. If there's any way in which your business or the business that you work for or a business that you know of is trying to connect with people, and they do it by handing something out or mailing something out, we want to ultimately take over some of that business. Because in so doing, you're not only getting your job done, you're getting your job done better, cheaper, more accurate, costing you less, and at the end of the day, you are helping people who are having a heck of a time finding employment, who are unemployable in some cases, gain work experience and actually get a paycheck. It's a major deal. So Jordan is employed by Say Hello. Casey is employed by Say Hello. Janelle's the brainchild. Nathan's the sales manager. So I just want to sort of put a plug in for Say Hello. Tonight is our Imago Day gathering. One of the things about On-Ramps that every Saturday is a little bit different. Tonight is about Genesis 1 and 27. The Lord said, let us make mankind in our image. In the image of God, He created him. Male and female, He created them. This theme of Be Reconciled in 2014 is ultimately what happens in Genesis chapter 3, where sin enters the world and totally distorts that image, that likeness but in which we were all created. And because it was distorted, our relationship with God was distorted, our relationship with ourselves was distorted, our relationship with each other was distorted, and our relationship with the rest of creation was distorted, and God's calling us to be wholly reconciled. So tonight we're going to get in a little bit deep into that work where God is saying, you are not fully who I intended for you to be. I want to introduce you to you. And so what that's going to look like is I'm going to take that which has been vandalized, and I'm going to take the graffiti removal, and I'm going to begin to clear it up. Because you need to fully be you in order that my purposes through you would be fulfilled on this earth. That is what tonight is about teaching, but it's also about us teaching one another. Tonight we are going to focus on, one, being reconciled to ourselves. One of the biggest categories under that umbrella, in terms of who you are and how you understand yourself, is your sexuality. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, what I mean by that is probably not even fully what you're thinking. So I'm going to kind of walk you down that road tonight. And the next week, we're going to go a little bit deeper, kind of break it down a little bit further, okay? And the next month, you know where we're going to go? One of the other major categories under being reconciled to ourselves. Next month, the month of June, we're going to talk about being reconciled to ourselves, but the topic will be our ethnicity. Race or ethnicity. Yeah, the churches, we're going to talk about race and ethnicity. We need to talk about race and ethnicity. Right. Donald Sterling's talking about race and ethnicity. We need to talk about a Jesus-centered, biblical view of race and ethnicity, and the good news that God's inviting us through Jesus to be reconciled. Not divided.
Amen.
All right? Amen. And so tonight, sexuality, here we go. Let me start with this. Sexuality has a Latin root. I don't speak Latin. Anybody speak Latin? I'm looking for somebody. Anybody? Good. So no one speaks it, which means that this is how you pronounce it. Sakare. Whatever. Alright, so there it is. Alright? Good. So all the non-Latin speakers, we all agree it's Sakare. Okay? So, alright, so Latin root Sakare. It means this. Sexuality means this. It means to cut off.
Wow.
To sever.
That's horrible.
To amputate. To disconnect from the whole.
Huh.
Is that what you thought when we said we were going to sexuality tonight?
No.
I don't know. Stay with me. Alright? Imagine this. What do you say, Kim?
I said what dictionary is that? She said it sounds more like circumcision.
Well.
Imagine this. Imagine this. Let me give you an image for sexuality. To cut off, to sever, to amputate, to disconnect from the whole. Were you to take a chainsaw, and to go to a tree and cut off one of its branches, you would have, this is a proper way to use this term, you would have sexed that branch. It's a proper way to use that word. You've sexed it. Okay? This branch, imagine with me, could it feel and could it think? Okay? If that were possible for this branch to think and feel, it would wake up on the ground. Severed, cut off, disconnected. A lonely little piece of wood,
Wow.
which was once part of a great organism.
Wow.
It would know in its every cell that if it wants to continue living, and especially if it wants to produce flowers and bear fruit, it must somehow
Wow.
reconnect itself to the tree.
Wow.
Tonight, it's about teaching. It's about teaching each other, learning from one another. Here's your question.
Huh.
How does this
Huh.
definition and understanding of sexuality change the way you have previously understood it? Okay? So, what sort of light bulbs are going off? What sort of things are happening inside of you going, wow, I never even thought about that way, and this is now what's coming to me, now that I've heard sort of a right definition of sexuality. So, we're going to break up. Okay, break up into, I don't know, maybe groups of 3, I think, because I want enough space and time for people to share, you know? So, this is for you, okay? So break up in groups of 3, roughly, okay? And engage this question. How does what I've just presented change the way that you have viewed and understood the concept of sexuality?
I'll do this.
What's now happening in your mind and in your heart and in your brain, okay? So break up, groups of 3. Here we go. You've had time to talk. Let's hear what you're thinking about, okay? So here's the question, okay? So how does, this definition and that very simple analogy, example, how does that change the way in which you've understood the concept of sexuality?
We don't get it.
Don't get it. Totally confused. That's good. Okay. It's a question for you. What happened? There's no. I've got thoughts on it, but there's no like right in. This is a question for you. How's it changed how you view it? Right. So yeah.
I'll take a run at it.
Yeah. Go for it.
When you, first of all, are in context, I was thinking of sexuality in context and how we as human beings, we have our own definition. Well, that was a new definition. When I started thinking about our sexuality as an identity, possibly, and the idea of sexuality outside of God's design and provision, oftentimes it cuts us off from right relationship with God or right relationship with who we're involved with or with our family. And once again, if it goes to the point of being identity, then soon, oftentimes we can't interact with this group of people because we've been cut off and separated, and we're no longer. So I think it functioning outside of God's design of sexuality can be very.
Great. How y'all feel? That's the first run. Y'all feel good about the first run? Yeah, first leg of the race is good? All right, good. Back there, Mom.
What I got from it was when you utilize Genesis 1 and 27,
Okay.
how when we were created, the woman was created, but she was still inside of the man.
Okay.
And then when there was a separation, then the sexes
Okay.
came into play. And then, which was, of course, the cutting away. And now when the two become one again, we're reconciled back to ourselves.
Okay. All right. How y'all feel about the second leg of the race?
I think she wins.
We're getting there? All right. All right. All right. Back in the back. Okay. Wait. You've got to help me.
Sharayla.
It's just it's gonna take time. Hold on. Don't give up on me. Okay, Sharayla.
We're gonna win this one. Now go ahead.
All right.
Well, our group got very intimate with this one. So, we talked about. Can you go back to the last slide?
I can. Yeah. This one here.
Yes. So when we talked about sex, some of us described having sexual intercourse and how it separates us and cuts us and disconnects us from God, and how we can, we can plant better seeds and to produce flowers and reconnect itself to the tree,
Okay.
which can be God.
Outstanding. Thank you. That's great.
Boom.
Sharayla, thank you. All right. Good. Who else had their hand? Who else want to share a little bit? What do you
Y'all
think?
can't see us.
Huh?
So y'all can't see us.
All right. Anybody from the back corner there, the quiet corner?
John, David,
Yo, look,
Justin,
this is new, so I know it's
Tiffany,
new, right? So it's,
Jennifer,
hey, birthday lady. Okay.
Happy birthday!
So I know it's new, okay? And so it's all, and for a lot of us, we process differently. Some of us really need to sit with this thing for, the next 4 months, right? And then we'll be ready to say something. But others of us have a thought now. So anyone else?
The part that I'm having a hard time reconciling in my life is, so prior to reading this, I would have said, or maybe I still would, I don't know, because I'm a little confused.
Yep.
But, right, so I would say that for me to be reconciled back to God, my sexuality, or that part of myself, whatever, I would need to be connected back to who God is. But the part about this definition is it's saying it's been cut off and it's been severed. So that is the part that I am having a hard time, which is the definition within itself. So totally, I feel like there's something not connecting for me.
Okay, good. Well, let's see. Yeah, Janelle?
I'll just come out of left field, why not?
Good.
Since nobody said this.
Yeah, we got center field and right field covered.
Be the
So
crazy
come on, let's go.
Well, the 3 words I wrote down, the first was promiscuity, and I can see being promiscuous as kind of a spiritual, trying to feel that need to reattach.
Okay.
Because we want to spiritually connect with the other person, and sex is a spiritual thing. So maybe promiscuity, trying to reattach. And I thought of the two becoming one, how God describes that in marriage, and so that reattaching through that. And then I just know when you're praying for soul ties and things that are formed between people in sexual relationships, you talk about giving back what's theirs and taking back what's yours. So that's just where my head went.
Awesome. Okay, good. Well, let me. I've got more questions coming. Okay, so here we go. But before we get there, let me just offer a couple of thoughts of my own, just for a moment. Okay, so this is challenging. It's challenging because it's definitely pushing our idea and understanding of sexuality. Let me start by saying this. I found it not surprising that some of us went from this definition of sexuality, which again is to sever, to cut off, to be removed from the whole, that kind of thing. And we started then to kind of immediately go and start talking about the act of sex. Now, that's like not in the definition at all. Okay? So I just want to sort of say that what I hope that you're going to get as sort of the first message of this month is that sexuality, the definition in a proper understanding of sexuality, is so much broader than just the act of sex. Okay? It's a much broader definition. Okay? So this is about being cut off. Okay? Now let me say this. I want to go back to this little quote here from the Holy Longing. And it says this at the end. It's fascinating. About this branch that's been severed. That it would know. It's every cell. That if it wants to continue to live, and especially if it wants to produce flowers and bear fruit, it must somehow reconnect itself to the tree. And it's every cell it would know that it has been disconnected, and that if it has any hope of living, it must, and especially bear fruit or produce flowers, it must. It's a requirement. It knows that its very survival is dependent on the fact that it reconnects itself to the tree. This is an understanding of sexuality. So let me say it this way. In a secular world, if that is true, then we are constantly trying because our livelihood depends. We know it in our very being, even beyond subconsciously. We know, we sense, we feel, we begin to think and act out of trying to connect because we realize we've been disconnected, severed, cut away. And so we are doing everything we can to connect to something or someone. In a secular society, that's what's happening. And now, in a society where if we were to start with God, and we were to begin to live out of that connection, say, God, I know that my livelihood, my very existence is that I am disconnected, but I must connect. There's a connection not happening. I need to connect. And if I start by trying to connect with God, then everything else in my life falls in order. But if we do not know God, then we will seek anything to find connection.
Wow.
Because our livelihood, not connecting is not an option.
Wow.
We must connect. We sense that our existence is dependent upon it. So I'm going to connect to something.
Wow.
Or somebody.
Wow.
Because I cannot live severed or disconnect. I got to connect. And outside of God, this is why evangelism is so critical. I know you're like, I don't want to evangelize. I want to tell anybody about Jesus. Look, they are living their whole lives. They may not be able to put it in words. They may not be able to talk about it. Y'all may not discuss it over the phone. But the reality is they are living their whole lives trying to connect. And they're going to connect with something or somebody.
Wow.
It's going to happen.
Yeah.
Because they know that their livelihood, their existence is dependent upon it. So here's the deal. If we don't tell somebody about God and connect them to God, then everything else in our world and everything else in their lives will be distorted. Because their connection is to something or somebody other than God Himself. Which takes us back to Genesis 1:27. If sexuality begins, basically, when Adam and Eve are separated, right? Where Eve is sort of born out of Adam, right? She has his rib. One could argue that that Eve has been sexed, if you will, from Adam, right? Kind of cut off in some way. Sexuality sort of finds its genesis in many ways, right there in that moment, right? And in the context of marriage, right, what's happening is you have two which have been really separated from each other but were intended to be connected to each other, now connecting in a way that God has ordained and intended, right? Does that make sense? Okay. And so if we are living our whole lives trying to connect to something and we do not connect to God, this is what I'm going to argue is part of what I think is at the root. Now just part, because it's more complicated than this. But part of what's at the root of our masculinity, femininity issues, is part of what's at the root of our homosexuality and lesbian sort of identities. It's what's at the root of our pursuit for sexual relationships. I think it's what's at the root partly of our interest in gangs. I think it's part of what's at the root of our career pursuits, and sometimes even what's at the root of our being part of a church. I want connection, but sometimes that connection happens without God. Yeah, even in the church. But I've got to connect somewhere or I'm going to die. And I know it. And so I start trying to connect to anything or anybody that I can. But outside of being reconnected to God Himself first, right? Be reconciled to God, ourselves. The next one's going to be to one another. And the last one's going to be to the rest of creation. Outside being reconciled to God Himself, all of our connections are distorted. All of them. This is what happens in Genesis chapter 3. Sin enters the world, disconnects us from God. We have been sexed from God by sin. And now we are trying to reconnect to something or somebody, and God's like, no, 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 no. Let me solve this once and for all. I'm going to send my son Jesus so that I can reconcile all things, everybody to myself through Jesus. Because if you're going to live the rest of your life, and you've been living for generations now, trying to live out this connecting thing with everybody and everything else, you make up your own gods to connect to something.
Wow.
He's like, no, no, no. That's why everything in this world is distorted. It's why you don't know you. It's why you and other people are constantly at war. It's why y'all constantly trying to compete with one another. He's like, this is not the way that I created the world to be. Let me get it right. I want you to be reconciled to me, and then every other relationship in this world will get in order. This is what God is after. Now, here's another question. All right. Group A and Group B. Group A is the left side of the room. Group A is the right side of the room. But you've still got to break up into groups of 3 within the left and the right. So here's a question from Group A. Your question is this. What does it look like when someone is desperate? Why y'all laughing? What happened? Y'all don't listen to me. I'm just trying to make sure that y'all listen. All right, here we go. Group A, Group B. All right, good. So Group A over here, what does it look like when someone is desperate for a connection and they seek to find it through romantic and sexual relationships? Because I got to connect somewhere. So what does it look like when someone, you might speak from experience, you might speak from somebody you know, you might speak just from something you're thinking about. What does it look like when someone who's desperate for connection is trying to find that connection through romantic or sexual relationships? Okay? For the first time, we're now talking about the act of sex, but it's born out of a much broader definition of sexuality. Okay? Group B, here's your question. How does a desperate pursuit of connection affect how we live out our roles as women or men in our society?
Wow.
Still under the role of under the umbrella of sexuality, because it's much broader than just the act of sex. Okay? Both of these fall underneath that umbrella. Okay? So, Group A, you ready? You need the question again? Okay, here we go. What does it look like when someone is desperate for connection and they seek to find it through romance and sex? Okay? Group B, here we go. The other Group A, I like to call you. How does a desperate pursuit of connection, all right, affect how we live out our roles as women, as men in our society? You good to go? Are we good to go? All right, you got some time. Break up in groups of 3, change them up, whatever, but let's spend some time answering those questions. That's y'all. All right. So what does it look like? Okay, and Group B, listen. You know, y'all didn't have this question, so let's hear what they say. What does it look like when someone is desperate for connection and they seek to find it through romantic and sexual relationships? What did y'all come up with? Let's start in the back this time.
Talked about how when someone's desperate and looking for it, they'll lower their standards and they'll sacrifice their dignity.
Okay, good.
Jesus
Anybody else?
help us.
John Murray, you had your hand up?
Yeah, we talked about so many different things. I think one thing we led to was like the peer pressure. So the peer pressure that happens today with, okay, so many people, their friends can be married, so then they may cause you to be like, oh, okay, now you're desperate for a connection, you know, in a sense. And so, you know, and that's where we kind of talk about the morals or the standards and values of somebody just, you know, lowered and just trying to rush into something so they can have this title and say that, hey, well, you guys are married. Hey, me too. You know, me and Susie, and the relationship is just jacked up. So
Me and Susie.
That's good, Kim.
I think that we not only lower our standards, but we settle for not finding somebody that'll help us execute our purpose. Like that's not even
Wow.
a factor because we're like, well, let's just go here because our purpose is not a key thing.
It's huge.
That's good.
That's really good. Good.
That's my sister.
Ah, get it.
Yeah. Good. Claim her. That's good. Good. Anybody else up here?
I was thinking that I think when I think of the desperation, I think of a very like an extreme codependent relationship where you've got someone who doesn't treat you well, and you are so desperate to stay with them.
Talk about it.
With a lot, and you will put up with abuse. You will put up with all kinds of things that are not healthy. Because you cannot not be connected somehow because you haven't been reconciled to God. Maybe to God, I don't think you can be, if you're not reconciled to God, you can't really be reconciled to yourself because then you don't know who you are in Christ. So that you can stand and say, I'm worth more than that to be treated
Wow.
this way. And so I think of that being like lowering your standards and not saying no, you're not going to treat me that way.
Wow.
Really good. Good. Maybe one more from over here. Is there anybody else wants to share on this side?
People go to extremes as well, so like if we're gonna lower our standards, it could possibly, we could go to extremes. Put ourselves in danger, put other people in danger, whatever that looks like, physically, emotionally, things like that, so.
That's the powerful thing about understanding sort of a right definition of sexuality. Is it's such a broad, much broader than we've thought, right? It really is about connection. You want to think about sexuality, your sexuality, right? Our sexuality is about connection. Been severed, disconnected. And so therefore we live our whole lives seeking to be connected, right? So powerfully, right? That desire is so powerful in us that we would actually enter into a relationship and stay in a relationship that's totally abusive, that's totally life-sucking, that's, all of these things, even get to the point where it's not just harming me, it's harming other people that I love and who love me. And I would stay in it, and I know we try to think about all these other reasons that we do it, but we'd stay in it because we're so desperate to be connected. That is sexuality.
Wow.
And it plays itself out in romantic or sexual relationships, but not just there. It plays itself out in our roles as men and women. Yeah? Okay, so I wanted to read something to you, and I'm at the end here before we get to y'all. I want to read this to you. Just a little excerpt from this book, The Holy Longing. Here's what he says about your question. He says this, Group A. He says, for a Christian, and this is a different perspective, I think, than y'all have than we have been exposed to about sexuality, and now he's going to talk about Group A's question. For a Christian, he says, sex is something sacred. Hence, it can never be simply a casual, unimportant, neutral thing. If its proper nature is respected, it builds the soul as a sacrament and brings God's physical touch to us. Conversely, though, if its proper nature is not respected, it becomes a perverse thing that works at disintegrating the soul.
Wow.
In a committed, loving, covenantal relationship, sex is sacramental, part of a couple's Eucharist. It is then a privileged vehicle of grace, an extraordinary source of integration for the soul, a deep well of gratitude, and something that will, through its own inner dynamics, open both persons to becoming life-giving, gracious, and blessing adults. He says this, conversely, sex that is devoid of those conditions will normally bring about the opposite effect. It will harden the soul, trivialize it, and work at disintegrating its unity. It will as well not open those engaging in it to real community, graciousness, and blessing, but instead help alienate them from real community. He goes on, and I'll just sort of cut to the chase here. He says this: for a Christian, sex by its very nature must be linked to marriage, monogamy, and a covenantal commitment that is, by definition, all-embracing and permanent. What is wrong with sex outside of marriage for a Christian is not so much that it breaks the commandment, although it does, but that ultimately it is a schizophrenic act. How so? By its very nature, sex speaks of total giving, total trust, and total commitment. There is unconditionality inherent in so intimate a sharing of one's soul. Thus, if real trust, commitment, and permanency and unconditionality are not present within the wider relationship, sex is partly a lie. It pretends to give a gift that it does not really give.
Wow.
And it asks for a gift that it cannot respectfully reciprocate.
Wow.
When one says, as does an old song, let the devil take tomorrow. Tonight I need a friend. The devil indeed does take tomorrow, and the friend usually disappears as well.
Wow.
He says again, our culture protests against this, but it can do little to mend the terrible heartaches, family breakups, violence, and occasional suicides that result from the fractured sexual relationships.
Wow.
What do you think?
Wow.
Yeah?
Wow.
Group B, where you at? Here's your question, and we're at the end. Group B, here we go. What'd y'all say?
Oh, okay. Open it back up. Open it back up.
Oh, Group B. Group B. There you go. What'd y'all say, Group B? Anyone? In the back, maybe. Thoughts about this? It's a hard one, right? Yeah, go ahead.
When we are desperate for connection, we talked about how it can cause us to become something that we're not sometimes in order to fit in and to be someone who's worth being connected to, because maybe who we've been or who we think we are hasn't been accepted before.
That's good.
Or it's been denied, or maybe you never had a healthy connection with your family or friendships, and so you get into this place where you have to become something that you think is going to be connected with.
Wow.
And
that's good.
It's really, I think that's part of the reason why, and it's beyond just relationships. It's gangs. It's why people do drugs. I think it's why people become addicted to things, because they have lost this sense of who they are and the beauty of who they are, because it's never been appreciated or loved or accepted. So I think that's...
Isn't that powerful?
Girl, you better preach.
That's right. Our connection, our desire to connect. This is sexuality. Big picture sexuality.
That's good.
We've been cut off, right? From a whole, from a larger whole. We've been, what are the other words? Severed, right? And so therefore our whole lives, we innately sense this need to connect, right? Because we sense that we are disconnected. And we will actually, even though we're trying to live out of who we are, and yes, even followers of Jesus who know who God's called you to be, you will even sacrifice that call just so that you can feel connected to some other identity that maybe people will embrace.
Wow.
Wow. Because you want to be connected so badly.
Help us,
that
Lord.
you'll give up what God's called you to do because people haven't really embraced that.
Wow.
Right? In order to do something that you're not called to do just because people will embrace that.
Help us, Lord.
That's how powerful, right? And how much a large part of our lives and our identity is found in our sexuality. The true definition. Yeah? Okay, other thoughts?
Wow.
Maybe one more, two more. What you got? This is a hard question.
We have some stuff.
Okay.
Want to share anything? I'll read the list and then I'll.
I appreciate how they just putting it on you like that.
It's okay. I'm only gonna elaborate on mine. So.
There's
So-
someone really smart said this. Yeah.
We have down just a lack of respect in general for yourself and for the others that you interact with.
Yeah.
Picking up habits from others, kind of conforming or compromising your standards.
Yeah.
And then, so how we live out our roles, then kind of constantly advertising. You know, I'm available, I have to attract to me, so that kind of desperate advertising to draw.
Wow.
And in that, then an inherent selfishness. I'm forming this relationship to get something from you, which harms the ability to form proper relationships. And,
Wow.
The last one is kind of an all or nothing mentality. We lose that loss of balance to where you're either attached to anything or attached to nothing. Or, you know, sometimes men then will go for anything but make the emotional attachment with nothing. So then that sex is empty, or the women will put everything out there with somebody who's a jerk and they're completely committed to that person. So they gave them all in the sense of the emotional tie, but they're getting nothing in return. And then, so that's
Good.
Wow.
Good. Maybe one more, maybe from the front group. Anything you want to share? Becca?
Well, just putting in the way she just put it, it brought to mind basically how a desperate pursuit of connection in itself would be even cutting yourself off.
Okay.
I mean, not trying to connect is a cutoff. I mean, it's still a connection to those who are not of God, who are not of the association that you really need to be with. You know, you cut yourself off to where you're connecting to the wrong type of people. And I can use myself as a prime example. You know, I tried to be connected to my family more, and in the same context, I was more involved with gangs and guns and stupidity. Whereas now I am connecting with God, and here I am, I'm operating better within society than what I did before.
Awesome. Great stuff. So here's where I want to finish tonight. We are so desperate for connection, but here's the freaky thing about it. You oftentimes aren't even aware of the desperation that you carry.
Wow.
Because it's so much a part of who you are in your very existence.
Wow.
That as we went back to the quote from earlier, that your every cell in your whole body would actually yearn for connection. That you don't even necessarily, it's not even a thought. It's not even a thought. It's deeper than that. It's not even a feeling. It's deeper than that. It is somewhere in like a third conscience. It is somewhere so much a part of you that you sense that you are disconnected, and you so long for connection that even when it comes to gender relationships, right? Who I see myself as a man, who I see myself as a woman, what it is to be a man, what it is to be a woman, what it is to be masculine, what it is to be feminine, that as I am trying to be fully who God has called me to be, if at some point society says you are not man enough, I will then begin to move over into some category where they'll now kind of bless me and knight me as you are a man now, right? Because you have done this, because you say these things, because you live this way. Same thing for women. You're not feminine enough. You're too hard. You speak too rough. I mean, you are not enough woman because you haven't done this. Are you a woman? I'm not sure if you're a woman, right? And so you just move on over until all of the women sort of in the world say, there's a woman who we respect. But look what's happened in our society. Now we've decided who is woman and who is man, and we go, well, that's a woman. She's on the front of People magazine. And there's a man, right? He's just started a movie. And we decided this is the ideal image for woman. This is the ideal image for man. And so now we're all moving out of who maybe God has called us to be fully as the woman God's called you to be. fully as who the man God has called you to be,
Yeah.
and we're moving very quickly in these two polar opposite directions to become like her or to become like him, in order that society would knight us and bless us and
yeah.
say, you are woman, you are man. God says no. He says, I want you. This is part. Watch. Here's what Jesus says about sexuality. Here's what Jesus says about sexuality.
Huh. Come on.
He says, you may have been cut off. He says, but I'm the vine.
Yeah.
You are the branches. If you would remain in me, and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. You cannot live outside of me. You lay like a branch at the side of the tree. You cannot produce fruit. You cannot flower. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. This is Jesus' answer to our longing for connection. He says, you can connect. You can connect to me. You want to know how great God is? God says, I formed you. I hid you away in the depths of the earth, in the secret place of the earth, to form you. And I said this last week. I don't think that the reason God hid you away in the depths of the earth was because he was trying to get your eyes in the right place. I think that there is a depth to you that you have yet to discover, and I think it goes deeper than any thought that you've had or any feeling that you've emoted. I think that there is so much to you that you have yet to fully discover, that God has invited us to be reconciled to ourselves, to the you that God designed and created and formed and knit together. I think there's so much to you that you and I think all of us need to launch our own NASA program to go deep into the galaxies of our very souls, to go into uncharted territory where we have never known the fullness of who God created us to be. And here's what God says: if you'll go on that journey, go on that mission, if you would allow me to speak into your life and into your spirit and say, sis, this is who I created you to be. Son, this is who I created you to be. And if you would be faithful to that, if society never, ever endorses you or blesses you, don't worry, your longing for connection will be met. Because I will never leave you nor forsake you. If no one else connects with you, I will connect with you. God is inviting us to a place where he says this. He says, I want you to go deeper with me. Connect with me. Go on a journey with me. May all of your longings for connection be found in me. And if you will allow me to fulfill your every desire to be connected, he says, then everything else in your life, all of the other connections, he says, will fall in order, and they will be healthy, and they will be honoring, and they will be right. This is why you really ought to be fasting with us on Thursdays as a church. Because you need to fast from some of your connections. Why? Because if you will fast from some of your connections, it creates space for God to speak into your life and say, that connection, the reason that you long for that connection and you can't get away from that connection is because that connection does not honor me. You need to let God, you need to fast from connections and let God speak into you and say, go deeper with me, daughter. Go deeper with me. Because that connection is, you're trying to get from that connection something that you could only get from me. So you need to connect from people. You need to disconnect from people on Thursdays. You need to disconnect from social media. You need to disconnect from music. You need to disconnect from all kinds of connections in your life. Fast with us on Thursdays and let him take you to deeper places of connection with himself. So that when you do, if you do re-engage in those relationships, I heard somebody mention Facebook. That's all about connection. That's why people stay on it. That's why they're constantly friending people they only met like for 30 seconds on the bus. Like, I'm not your friend. You know what I'm saying? You sat in the front, I sat in the back. You know, I'm like, I don't know you. And yet you try to friend me.
Right.
Because you want to be connected. And
Yeah.
I get it. I get it. But you really need to get connected with God.
Come on.
Because if you get connected with God,
Come
then
on.
all these other connections will
Line
bear
up.
fruit.
Yeah, line up.
As
Yeah.
opposed to drain every little bit of life out of you.
Wow. Whew.
God says, I'll connect with you.
Mm.
Go deeper with me.
Mm.
Go deeper with me.
Mm.
And I'll show you parts of you
Mm.
that you've never known before.
Mm.